This video contains full spoilers for 13 Reasons Why, obviously, and a content warning for a discussion of school shootings. No graphic images or details. Sorry to those of you who are just learning this, but 13 Reasons Why had a 4-season run, and I have good news and bad news. The good news, this is the last one. The bad news, this is the worst one. I heard whispers of a Dylan Minnette-led Season 5, but that seems to have perished in lockdown alongside Cinema Etiquette and Queen Elizabeth II. This means that my solemn oath to review the full show is finally nearing completion, and I can return to Blue-haired Valhalla to slumber, feed, and read Annihilation again. We're going to structure this video problem by problem, not episode by episode or character by character, and I'm going to start with problem 1. Structure. Let's just get this runaway train back on the rails so that it can run away again. If we were to structure this essay from broadest to most specific problems with 13 Reasons Why Season 4, we'd naturally have to begin with the structure. So take a moment to look at this. This is the Miro board of notes I created about Season 3, and this is the Miro board of notes I created about Season 4. Do you see the difference? Season 3 was like one of those games of chess played on multiple boards, except some of the boards were made of Play-Doh and human droppings, and one of the boards replaced the tyrant rapist king piece with a sweet misunderstood king and hoped we wouldn't notice the difference. Sections are titled things like The Funeral, Annie and Clay, Bryce and Annie, Jess and Activism. There's a full timeline of events leading to Bryce's death as they are revealed to us. There's all sorts of arrows and interconnecting plot points tying topic to topic in unusual ways. Season 3 might have just been a smorgasbord of chaos culminating in an awful message that shit on everything the show had tried to achieve up until this point under the guise of starting a conversation, but it was at least entertaining. Everyone had a storyline that moved in a different direction, but dominoes between each of them ensured that they often interlinked with those around them. With a few exceptions, the wider storyline was broad, but coalesced in those final few episodes for a conclusion that, whilst an unearned farce of a murder mystery ending with a plugged-in perpetrator reveal of a character that had zero relevance to events up until this point, did still pay off. It takes a lot to compare Season 3 of 13 Reasons Why favourably to anything, considering it was sensationalist exploitative garbage, so naturally it would still outshine Season 4, which managed to follow in the worst way. I might have more post-its for Season 4, because more things literally happen within each episode, but they're oversimplified now. The whole season is one straight line. The opening credits are now stripped back, no little pictures or scribbles or headlights like before, just a black screen with a title card. The pre-show disclaimers are still there, but they're useless now, like school violence for the school shooting episode, a warning that ended up pale in comparison to the on-screen depiction. Layered by episode, beginning with episode 1 in the middle and branching out to episode 10, and yes, there are only 10 episodes this time, Season 4's web of interconnecting plotlines is more like a highway. There are like 12 lanes, sure, but everyone is just driving alongside each other to the same destination. Comparatively speaking, Season 4 is a lot like a game of mousetrap. It appears convoluted from the outside, some crazy mechanism of bells and whistles, but really everyone's just following the same path. Lowering the number of episodes was probably a shout, but the show still struggles with what it has. 13 Reasons Why Season 4 has a few issues in its storytelling. 1, it tries to tell too many stories at once. 2, those stories often stretch 2-hour problems into full 10-hour odysseys, refusing to let them end organically or even develop into other situations. And 3, these stories are told so inefficiently that episodes are crammed full of scenes that only seek to repeat the same banal points, whilst more interesting scenes are often omitted entirely. Like, Clay gets into a violent car accident at the end of one episode in a huge death fake-out, and at the start of the next episode we find that several weeks have passed and he was entirely unharmed. No one ever mentions the crash after that. Instead, the season just focuses on one big story about a group of friends who have covered up a murder and how various factors threaten their shared secret. And no, it's not interesting enough for 10 episodes. In our modern world, when episodes tend to span the length of films and have budgets to rival them, I feel a bit cheated when stories are stretched out more for the sake of filling time and inserting ad breaks than they are in actually entertaining me. I don't need an extra 50 minutes of cheap and manipulative storyline hooks to keep me engrossed in a mediocre piece of fiction. I'd rather be spending that time with today's sponsor, Brilliant. Brilliant is everyone's favourite daily learning app. As more learning apps are cutting costs and personnel by moving into an AI-first model, poisoning their platform with inaccuracies and sucking the soul out of their courses, Brilliant has stuck to what it does best, creating handcrafted, curated catalogues of learning materials for you to make the most out of every single day. What's wrong with AI, Kirsty, you might ask? And I could answer, or you could sit down with their learning mascot Koji and understand how AI works, the intricacies, its actual applications, how it can actually benefit us, but also its limitations. Brilliant is all about giving you the tools to build real critical thinking abilities in a series of bite-sized lessons. Learn by doing, not memorizing, and understand the technologies around you for yourself. Try Brilliant today for free over at brilliant.org/merkkk. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. Thanks to Brilliant for sponsoring today's video. As we re-enter the world of 13 Reasons Why, we find the time skip between seasons 3 and 4 to be one of our shortest yet. Season 4 takes place a month or two after the end of season 3 and focuses on how the group recover from the consequences of killing a man and getting away with it completely. Alex is crumbling under the weight of the guilt of killing Bryce and seeing no justice. Jess is now dating a man called Diego who wants to find out the truth of Bryce's death at any cost so he can posthumously absolve Monty. Zach's fed up with lying and ready to act out until he's basically forced to tell the truth. And Clay, who actually had very little to do with events, is now cracking under pressure he was never really under. Residual trauma from being arrested and almost convicted for a murder he had nothing to do with, and a build-up of mental health problems that plagued him since season 1. Basically, everyone has a reason to come clean, and to spoil a half-assed conclusion, no one does. This means that every episode is a series of characters being told, I have the information I need to put you and your friends away for life, then things developing, then sometimes this being resolved in such a way as to deflect fault or redirect the investigation temporarily, or to placate the accuser in some way, and sometimes nothing happening at all. More plot points are merely forgotten in this season than previous seasons. I feel like a lot of scenes were cut to add ambiguity to storylines like Jess's, and some scenes seem to have been rearranged to be earlier or later in the runtime, confusing events unintentionally. This season is a tired mess. It doesn't know what it's doing with itself, nor does it really know why anymore. The first 2 episodes are a major slog. After this, they try to spice it up by theming each episode around something different, like a school dance or a camping trip, and usually pinning on some wider social theme that they end up saying too little about to be worthwhile. School shootings, deportations, police violence and overreach, college, protests and riots, and AIDS. All of these episodes ring hollow. They play out like year 10 drama projects. We know you're trying to start a conversation, 13 Reasons Why, but it's been 4 years. The conversation has begun, and it becomes more obvious by the hour how little you're actually interested in saying. You can't just keep coming into the room screaming, no one is talking about sexual assault, then shrugging your shoulders and leaving. 13 Reasons Why Season 1 came out in the same year that the Me Too movement began. Dragging instances of harassment and sexual abuse out into the light was, relatively speaking, not yet mainstream, and you can't ride those coattails forever, hands out, demanding brownie points for announcing that bullying happens and that men can be toxic. And also, there's no point starting a conversation if you're just lying to my face about things. No one is talking about AIDS, you say, and then announce that it develops from HIV within the span of a year. No one is talking about steroids, you announced in season 3, then turned steroid use into some werewolf allegory. Sometimes saying nothing is better than saying something, 13 Reasons Why. You've already muddied the water on the topic of school shootings so much that you had your main character walk over to one and talk no jutsu his way into saving him from himself against all actual relevant advice. Maybe it's time to make a new and different show before you get your audience in serious trouble. Season 4 also drops the multiple timelines that previously characterized it. I personally don't mind using multiple timelines to tell a story, although I did occasionally critique what they tried to achieve. Flashbacks occasionally served some tenuous objectives, but splitting episodes into 2 timelines allowed for developments to come in thick and fast, often in the form of reveals that shaped a viewer's perspective of certain events. Something happens in the present, you make judgments, and then you see a scene from the past that changes those judgments. It's cheap when used in excess, but if it's used well and with restraint, it can make a story feel more layered. So removing them demonstrated just how shallow the storytelling of 13 Reasons Why is. Without multiple timelines and all the associated storytelling tools of a structure like that, 13 Reasons Why Season 4 had to lean extra hard on all the other stuff it would typically use to contrive some tension. Only with the multiple timeline structure gone did I realise how hard this show relies on framing characters like they'll be a certain kind of person, only to lean a reveal on them being totally different.
Yeah, it never would have happened in my day. 2 prom cakes.
The stern and scary Dean of Discipline, Dean Foundry, fakes out that he's going to be offended by 2 men being crowned prom king and queen. Then Snap reveals that he actually has a black husband named Joshua at the end of the scene, which I suppose is supposed to be a punchline, but I feel like, haha, the straight-laced mean guy is actually a homosexual is a writing device I find quite overdone.
Foundry's gay?
Mind's blown.
Sheriff Diaz, who previously arrested Clay off the back of Nora Walker's gut feeling, almost having a teenage boy put away for murder he wasn't even physically present for, is revealed now to have this Severus Snape vibe relationship with the kids, minus the incel stuff. Towards the end of the season, we learn he was pulling strings the entire time to keep them safe, always working in their best interest.
He arrested me once.
Wasn't he just doing his job?
But I think maybe he's pretty good at his job.
And my final third example, because I love doing threes, is Officer Wynn. Season 3 featured a storyline about how Tony often saw himself as the innocent victim of profiling and disproportionate police violence, getting manhandled and even arrested over a fraction of what Clay was performing every minute. Season 4 sees Tony appear to be unfairly profiled again. After a vandal leaves graffiti on the admin doors at school, Tony is grabbed and subjected to a search against the locker. This initially seems to be echoing the sentiment of unfair treatment of Season 3, but the officer points out that Tony has red paint under his fingernails, justifying his suspicion. Later, when Tony follows Tyler through the school, he is grabbed by the officer again, who points out that Tony blew right by the toilets he was apparently going to. When Tony makes a fist, a show of aggression, the officer decides he likes Tony's fire. He invites him to his pro-am boxing league. He saves Tony from being arrested at a riot, knowing he's on 2 of 3 strikes and another infraction will land him in prison. Soon, he is calling university scouts and getting Tony interviews for a full scholarship at the University of Nevada so he can have the life his parents always wanted for him. And so Tony learns not all cops, and his story concludes. Most of the characters introduced in this season are framed around how they seem and then cheaply spun back on themselves in a bid, I can only assume, to make the viewer look at themselves and wonder how they could possibly have been so prejudiced. It's super cheap. Season 4 of 13 Reasons Why also implements the cheapest of the cheap methods for raising stakes: the death fake-outs. See, there are 2 instances of flash-forwards in Season 4 occurring at the start of episodes 1 and 2. In these flash-forwards, we see a cookie-cutter funeral scene attended by a vaguely specified crowd of the main cast. There's no photo of the deceased. Great effort is made to discuss the subject of death without touching on any specific information, name, pronouns, or even the cause of death, and we get an insultingly shallow result.
How are we responsible? What burdens are we placing on our young people? What tools are we keeping from them?
If it hasn't already hit you like a brick to the teeth, this speech highlights how little 13 Reasons Why has developed in the years since Hannah Baker's death, still repeating those same old platitudes, still unable to furrow any kind of depth. How are we responsible? 13 Reasons Why asks, when Season 1 was dedicated to unpacking the shared responsibility of community. What burdens do we place on teenagers? Season 4 asks, when all 3 seasons have taken deep dives into every burden, ranging from abortion to deportation to activism. The tools question is nonsense and not even worth unpacking, like there's some magic stick you can wave to end hardship as a teenager. How many conversations do you want to start? How many are you actually going to finish? But what's more is how this funeral is a physical metaphor for how little the show cares about doing anything anymore. Season 3 was framed around the funeral of Bryce Walker. We had his portrait, all the characters did their meaningful and heartfelt speeches, and it wasn't drip-fed as some reveal. Season 3 built itself on some ridiculous logic, sure, but narratively it knew what it wanted to be. A thought experiment in whether a rapist could be exonerated, whether dying was enough to allow people to see the good in someone who had done incalculable harm to others. Season 4 frames the series around the mystery of this funeral instead. Who is it? Who will be the person to die? In episode 2, we bear witness to some half-hearted testimony from new main cast member Charlie, implying that each episode will show another testimony from another cast member until you slowly figure out the deceased by process of elimination. But 13 Reasons Why gives up on this ghost immediately. This season puts so much effort into setting up stakes that it ends up producing a very exploitative funeral scene for, as we learn, a beloved character who at least deserved a photo of themselves up by the coffin. And exploited it is. Although the series gives up on having the funeral speeches every episode, it goes whole hog with spending the entire season faking out death after death after death. Charlie seems to be knocked dead in a protest only to be fine.
Charlie, please, wake up. Charlie, come on, please.
Clay crashes Zach's car with them both in it, going 80 miles an hour around a tight turn and flipping the vehicle off the road, and after another grim death fake-out, they're all fine too.
Welcome back. Welcome back.
At one point, a cornered illegal arms dealer points a gun at Tyler, Clay, and Tony and shoots. At the start of the next episode, this is totally forgotten. No one was shot. Tony is placed in a pro-am ring with a white supremacist who tells Tony that he's going to kill him, making you think Tony has flown too close to the sun against the advice of his partner Caleb. But Tony beats the guy with zero issue whatsoever. Clay runs into a school shooter who fires on him, only to turn out to be a hallucination of himself, so on and so forth. Fake out, fake out, fake out. So by the time the real death comes, you can assume that, in true 13 Reasons Why fashion, it will be totally out of left field, fairly unearned, and probably really badly handled. 13 Reasons Why has never been a show to reward the attentive viewer for putting the clues together themselves. It takes a leaf out of that late Game of Thrones writing, where the creators of that show got really annoyed that people guessed where certain storylines were going to go, and then suddenly did massive 180s and pulled totally different endings out of their asses. There's this reluctance in TV today to be understood, even though an engaged and rewarded audience is typically a more loyal one. There's this massive disdain for a viewer who really truly wants to understand, and it puzzles me as to why. Anyway, it's Justin. And while Justin dying was, in itself, a very emotional crescendo for his character in the show, this funeral was such an aggressive manipulation that it highlighted just how much the show had relied on killing teenagers for drama. Every episode another arm twist into a life or death situation, and yet simultaneously almost completely without proper consequences, because consequences need to be written around and planned for. They make stories more complicated and place limitations on what characters can say or do. Bluntly speaking, they make writing hard, so why would we do that? To dredge a prior example back to the surface, not only did neither Zach nor Clay die in the violent car accident, but Clay is totally unharmed, not even a bruise. And although Zach limps and reports a broken leg again, he has no crutches and just kinda stops limping halfway through the next episode, like the actor forgot and no one reminded him. The accident is never ever acknowledged by anyone outside of Zach and Clay. We never find out what happened to Zach's car or what his notoriously controlling mother thought of the situation. None of their friends know or care, and it's never mentioned again. The phrase I kept writing in my notes was, I guess this could happen, because episodes of this show are so contrived, consequences so discarded, drama so heightened, that you could write huge paragraphs about how things wouldn't happen or wouldn't happen like that. But I guess technically in the most extreme fringe case that you're now playing to me as the reality median experience, it could. Zach falls out with Clay and tells him to never speak to him again, but this is also forgotten. They're just mates again later.
You are a goddamn nightmare, so please just stay the fuck out of my life.
Naturally, Clay is the main character, so he sees himself as some weird victim of every situation.
I've lost friends. I need my life to change. Something to, wake me up.
Clay, if disassociating, hijacking, and crashing your friend's car with them inside it as they beg you to slow down doesn't wake you up, I don't think much else will. This is how people know they need help, and not how they know to start thinking about maybe they need some sign from someone else to indicate that their life needs to change. Anyway, yes, multiple timelines gone, lazy writing crutches flood in to take their place. There are only so many ways you can contrive a reason for students of a high school to be in a perceived life or death situation. One or two students can face death in a car accident, sure, but in an American high school setting where you want your entire cast of teenage characters to be looking death in the eye, saying their goodbyes, and coming to terms with the fact that any moment might be their last, what would you, a writer, still probably never ever resort to, because it would be in such poor taste that you would never be able to live with yourself professionally forever after? The school shooting episode is one of the most infamous parts of Season 4. This episode is titled Thursday, which I assume is intended to add to the banality of tragedy, whilst also not tipping off the Netflix viewer who accidentally moves the mouse and catches a glimpse of the title. Quick summary for those who haven't read it: Principal Boland initiates a code red lockdown with no warning to any teachers or students, leading the entire school to believe that there is a real active shooter. Police enter the premises, try the door handles, and fire blanks outside classrooms to simulate it being a real school shooting situation. Yes, they fire blanks. The students and teachers all believe it's real. From here we go from character to character, watching them deal with the weight of dying right there on a random Thursday, no warning, no reason. It's abundantly cruel. Watching a gang of teenagers get psychologically tortured so horribly that they're ringing their parents to say one final goodbye, leaving voicemails telling them how much they love them, that's insane to watch, and knowing it's all one big farce comes off so exploitative. Because, again, say it with me folks, I guess it could happen. I could talk all day about how live shooter drills are almost always performed with warning, and any performed without warning certainly wouldn't employ the use of simulated gunfire. I could talk all day about the articles and anecdotes I read detailing how 13 Reasons Why spat in the face of depicting anything accurate or useful, instead aiming for pure shock value in yet another death fake-out. Ultimately, I suppose a school with a vast disrespect for its own student body could do something like this. This could happen, maybe, in an extreme situation. Yet the sub 1% chance that this ever happens this way in real life does not suddenly make this episode okay. It's not a valuable episode to create regardless. Because why start a conversation or depict something of value to your young audience when you can dredge up an excuse to have teenagers calling their parents to say one final goodbye without actually being in any danger whatsoever? Why not do this at all? Actually, why not do something else? At this point, 13 Reasons Why had to be counting on controversy marketing, surely. Surely no one in the writer's room actually thought this was a good idea. The episode concludes on Clay having a nervous breakdown and grabbing an officer's gun, a move that sees him manhandled and slammed to the floor by a police officer, knocked unconscious, and then carted out of the room by waiting paramedics, handcuffed to the stretcher he's on.
He wasn't just upset, he ended up in a psych ward pissing his bed. Well,
as the episode ends on this deliverance of horrific police violence in the wake of a drill more aligned with psychological torture than meaningful disaster preparation, it cuts to black and Melt the Guns begins to play in a move so tone deaf I actually started laughing. So where on earth do we begin with this? The purpose of Thursday is to form the final act of Jess and Tyler's storylines, which we'll get into in a moment, and most crucially, get Clay from a place of mental struggle to mental breakdown. Clay gets trapped alone in the robotics classroom with nothing but his thoughts and the echoing sound of gunshots in the corridor outside. Mentally, he is on thin ice. He finds that he is not alone, sort of. The Jedi ghosts of Monty and Bryce have arrived to keep him company, and that's our first glaring issue.
If you die today, is your conscience clear?
So it's time to say it. Using ghosts, visions, imaginings, whatever you want to call them, of dead characters to push a story along is the weakest, laziest, most pathetic writing tool in this show's arsenal. Ghosts have been a part of 13 Reasons Why for so long that it's hard to imagine the show without them. In season 2 they were used to allow Clay to talk through his feelings about Hannah with someone, despite him being an extremely insular man who never talks about his feelings. So Hannah appeared to him as a ghost. Like, yeah sure, we'll allow Clay Jensen one ghost, but it better not become a habit. In season 3, Bryce's ghost begins to appear to taunt Clay from beyond the grave. By season 4, we have Bryce, Monty, and eventually Justin each appear to Clay and Jess and whoever else to talk absolute bollocks in their ears. Justin's ghost is the worst offender, but they're all just lazily written insertions. See, by the end of episode 6, we need to see that Clay's mental state has snapped. Do we write this organically? Do we show the decline of Clay, how his relationships with the living have severed? No, because factors like that might impose permanent consequences on his character. He might not somehow get into Brown University by the end of the series, because yes, the writers are so scared of consequences and so precious about their main character that Clay will sail through into one of the top schools in the country with zero effort. Instead of doing anything that might take time, effort, and thought, the show sits Clay under a desk in a classroom on his own and has him tormented for the majority of the episode's runtime by Bryce and Monty. While that scene has some funny moments,
It's too bad you won't live. But then again, who does?
Blade Runner, nice.
Well, we only know it because he does.
you'll notice that it served the purpose of pushing Clay to breaking point, so that his entire transition into mental breakdown has concluded in one room without any other character involvement. It's the equivalent of that scene from Game of Thrones where Dany's entire philosophy and personhood changes in like a 7-second CGI dragon sitting sequence. When you peel back the layers of scenes like this, you begin to realise how ridiculously cheap they are. Clay can't fall out with anyone on the cast and have that lead to a mental breakdown, because that might be something you have to write around later, and that would be hard. We can't have Clay's home life crumble. His bed is still made, he's seeing his therapist, his parents are ineffably loving and supportive and continue to stand by him at every turn, regardless of how hard he shoves it in their faces. So instead, we insert 2 dead characters and have them talk Clay into a breakdown. This show seems to forget just how little of an involvement Clay had in either of Bryce or Monty's deaths, but it retrofits it so that he has a reason to crumble under the anxiety of it all. I suppose Clay is unstable enough that he would take this stuff to heart regardless, but he had nothing to do with Bryce's death and even less to do with Monty's, or even Monty as a person. But with the way these 2 ghosts linger around him, taunting him, you'd think he had them buried under his own floorboards. In lieu of writing actual character development, which might take a while and might be difficult, the writers of 13 Reasons Why often have Clay's character arc delivered to him by ghosts. This is the only show I've ever seen where any kind of character writing is foregone so that Clay can be told how he feels, how others feel about him, how he should feel, by projections of his imagination. And it is so weak.
Am I going crazy?
Asked and answered, no.
Yes, before you say it is also the funniest part of the show. You can have that. This insult to storytelling results in Clay apologising for framing Monty for Bryce's death. Another thing he didn't directly do, but I suppose was complicit in.
Yes, I'm sorry.
I didn't think he'd actually admit it.
We got through to him.
This scene goes on for a long time, and Dylan Minnette is fantastic at delivering the visage of a teenager who has cracked completely. These scenes are delivered super well, even if they're narratively superficial. By the time he leaves the classroom, he's so broken that he runs into the shooter, only to find that the shooter is him. And the shooter shoots him, but no bullet enters him, because there was no shooter. Principal Boland yanks Clay into the office, admonishing him for not following protocol. Clay is reminded that if this wasn't a drill, you would be dead. He handles this well.
You are killing us, don't you get that? You mean a drill? With gunshots and you hammer down the door to prepare us for what exactly? For what it feels like to be hunted?
The shooting drill serves the purpose of shattering Clay's mental state over the course of an hour, and therefore could really have been replaced by almost anything. Only 13 Reasons Why wanted to cover a hot topic and did so by creating a situation so contrived that they created nothing of value in the process. Say it with me, folks. Well, I guess it could happen. Although the through line of the shooting is Clay's breakdown, this plot beat forms the crux of Tyler's character arc and his relationship with his friends, Tony, Alex, and Charlie. Now that Tyler's absolution plotline of Season 3 has concluded, and in his specific French case, the source of gun violence has been addressed, and against all odds he's now totally cured, mentally healthy, and looking forward to his future, all thanks to the power of love. Season 4 needs a new potential villain. I'm sorry, Tyler, but you're on the chopping block again. We killed everyone else in the villain category because we don't know how else to write drama, and introducing a new villain might be hard to write, and my fingers hurt from holding the pen, so we'll need to take our current characters and twist them backwards instead. Tyler finds himself re-embroiled with the police when his fished-up bag of guns from the cliffhanger of Season 3 are pulled out of the river. Oh no, is this going to be a huge problem? Someone is responsible for those guns. Although Tyler isn't traced to the guns, he is traced to the purchase of the gym bag. No one foresaw that. That's not good. This is a felony. Surely they can't wriggle their way out of this. Wriggle they do, and wriggle off screen, because writing that kind of negotiation might be hard, and my fingers hurt. So we don't see any of it past the first minute, and we are told about it later. See, Deputy Standall, Alex's father, the man who covered up his murder, previously orbited this friendship group as an insidious, distant threat. Not directly menacing them, no, but a force of, in theory, adult, lawful, good. He might not be on them now, but any misstep might earn his attention, and his proximity to the group through Alex meant that they all had to be extra careful not to slip. When Standall covered up the murder his son committed, I mean, I said this in the last video, but to repeat, I could understand why he did it, but I didn't understand it totally flying under the radar of the entire investigating team, who had a ton of competing evidence. But I suspend my disbelief. Now, however, the writing room has employed another lazy device for their work. The police officer who can suspend any suspicion, any charge, and any crime. Before this, the group had to work within the confines of the law, or at least the confines of how do we hide this from the law. Now we have Deputy Ex Machina, who off-screen negotiates Tyler out of shouldering any charges whatsoever for his connections to illegal firearms, the literal core of the cliffhanger from last season that spelt horrible consequences for the main cast, and will continue to serve the main cast by shielding them from any realistic repercussions. The storyline doesn't end here, per se, because Tyler will have to earn his deferred those charges by participating in gun deals as a plant, which I'm not sure an 18-year-old should be doing, but fine. But functionally, it ends here as any legal stakes are obliterated. In lieu of any quantifiable actual consequences, Tyler's storyline is hedged with, is he even our friend anymore? Is he going to re-offend as a school shooter? And other wishy-washy bullshit. Tyler becomes this social contagion to be carefully handled at best and downright avoided at worst, thus beginning the have faith in your friends storyline. Tyler isn't relapsing into being a school shooter, he just isn't telling them that he isn't allowed to talk about what he's actually doing, and instead skulks around, not doing much to defend himself from suspicion at all. When his friends follow him, they find him in all sorts of suspicious situations, ranging from sitting in the car with police officers to literally buying guns on the street. He avoids his friends for weeks at a time.
They don't trust me at all.
I mean, in time they'll all know it's for the best.
Tyler performs exceptionally well during the Stop the Bleed event, where students are taught how to save each other during school shootings, knowing how entry and exit wounds work, knowing which rifles they should be practicing with, to the suspicion of their instructor. He talks about guns with this rapturous, obsessive delight, as if he's describing a new puppy. He tells his college interviewer that he's drawn to guns, and talks about them as though they sexually arouse him.
I think guns can be beautiful. I mean, you can be attracted to them.
All of this culminates in the shooting drill. Tony sees Tyler before the drill, and the moment the lockdown begins, he looks up and sees that Tyler is gone. Tony and co find annotated printouts of illegal firearms in Tyler's school bag, which he left behind. Tony hands them into Dean Foundry, who doesn't care. We, the audience, have seen a broad enough spectrum of Tyler's behaviour to be able to tell that he's not about to commit mass murder against his cohorts anytime soon, but his friends don't know that because he hasn't told them, and he doesn't seem to agree that he has a track record he'd rather be safe than sorry with. I think it's perfectly reasonable to escalate it to the Dean when you find that your gun-obsessed, previously extremely unstable and potentially deadly violent friend is missing during a school shooting that no one has been told is a drill and everyone thinks they will die in.
Do we protect everyone or just ourselves?
Long after Tyler's absence has been noted as correlating perfectly with the start of the shooting, well after his friends have deliberated long and hard about whether to protect themselves by keeping Tyler's gun photos a secret, or whether to hand those printouts in at the cost of potentially reopening the Bryce Walker case. Don't worry, handing in those printouts won't amount to a single thing and they may as well have not existed. We cut to Tyler, who is hiding in the bathroom. He hides in the bathroom with Estella de la Cruz, Monty's younger sister, who misses her brother but also totally understands why most of the school is not super unhappy to see him go. Believing she is alone, Estella calls her mother to leave a tearful goodbye voicemail, making sure her last words are, "I love you." Tyler is actually crying in the cubicle, as being back in the school bathrooms is really upsetting for him. Estella, a woman in a 13 Reasons Why episode, is here to serve two purposes. She is here to act as the one good part of Monty, and she is here to be the complicated love interest for Tyler. As with Annie in the previous season, who was the one good part of Bryce and the complicated love interest for Clay, there is nothing else to her character. She sits and reads Crime and Punishment while she waits for the lockdown to lift, a book I assume chosen to indicate that she is intelligent.
Why would someone do something like this?
Maybe they're in a lot of pain. I almost did. But my friends helped me get better.
I'm glad that you didn't do anything.
Estella spends the rest of the school shooting reassuring Tyler that he's a great person and that she's sorry for what her brother did to him. Soon after this scene, Tyler invites her to prom and she enthusiastically, like really enthusiastically, agrees to go.
Would you ever want to go to prom with me? Really weird.
Hell yes.
Well, I guess it could happen. You'll notice I don't have a dedicated section to discuss Estella in this video, and that's because we've basically covered all she is already. Tyler's story ends on this note of trust your friends when they tell you they've changed, a spillover from Season 3's have faith in school shooters because they can become good people again, bizarre message about how you can love someone well enough that you'll cure their need to kill as many innocent classmates as they can before turning the gun on themselves, and therefore foregoing anything worth discussing. Sometimes I don't think we go hard enough on Tyler. Even with Monty dead, Tyler's friends put their heads together during the school shooting and acknowledged that the school is still full of plenty of people who gave Tyler a bad time, plenty of people he'd want to murder. Those people didn't rape him. If Monty's dead and they still believe Tyler would be capable of a school shooting, is he really that cured? I think most of us can understand how it feels to be bullied, but very, very, very few, if any, I would hope, of us can empathise with the drive to spend months risking our safety collecting illegal firearms in illegal firearm deals, transporting them to school or work or whatever, and then opening fire fire on hundreds of people at a school dance. A school shooting isn't some spur-of-the-moment crime of passion, some momentary lapse of judgment. Tyler's plan to murder countless classmates and friends was a long-term, planned and paid-for effort to commit as much violence as he possibly could before turning the gun on himself, and yet the show paints it with the same sympathy as it paints Hannah, who died by suicide. They are both treated like helpless victims of their own circumstances who cannot help their actions. Argue that for Hannah if you must, but don't suggest that about Tyler.
I'm glad that you didn't do anything.
I felt for Tyler during season 3 because the show puts an incredible amount of effort into forcing you to feel for Tyler, wedging in 1,000 contrivances to paint him as a good person, briefly and regrettably led astray by factors outside of his control. But I think you need to be fundamentally evil to do what he almost did, and I think it's a really good thing that his friends decided that, despite their bond, they would report him to a trusted authority, even if it meant it would get them in trouble by proxy. It's a great thing that they didn't excuse this perceived act away, and acted against their own self-interests, to do what they could in an assumed life or death situation to make their classmates safer. Tyler takes it well.
Do you think the last year, everything that we've been through, does that all just mean nothing to you?
I was doing what I thought was the right thing.
You could have ruined my life.
Oh, that delivery made me cringe. Sorry, why are you growling through your teeth at him? Because you almost killing countless students and ruining the lives of hundreds of families made him quite hesitant about seeing you displaying the same behaviour again? Why is Tony the problem? The show is hell-bent on depicting Tony as an overzealous, controlling, meddling annoyance who should have held his faith in his friends, rather than rushing to the authorities. Just been a bit more patient, just waited a moment longer, just spoken more and acted less. What he did to Tyler was rude, and it made Tyler angry and feel isolated, which made Tyler lash out, which is painted as very dangerous. Why does the show imply that making Tyler upset might be a dangerous choice, and that Tyler's reaction is any of Tony's responsibility? Are we suggesting that someone might be forced to return to old ways if we don't treat them well enough? The moral of this school shooter drill is, trust your friends to always do the right thing, even if you're fairly certain you're about to be gunned down by them, because they're probably doing something you'd never even considered and you're going to hurt their feelings. The other facet of this event is the school security storyline, which examines the school's implementation of various kinds of security measures and how our student body president Jessica Davis deals with balancing that and the reaction of the student body. These measures culminate in this unwarned school shooter drill with fired blanks. We last saw Jess undergo the character assassination of a lifetime in season 3, painted as a radical, overzealous feminist who tried too hard to make change, poisoned by the now absent radical militant man-hater Casey. By season 4 she has learned her lesson. Protests hurt people, activism hurts people. The status quo will listen kindly when you tell them your grievances and will roll over obligingly and allow you to take back power even when it disadvantages them. Anything beyond putting up a poster is basically inciting a riot, so you should try to be more submissive and maybe then you'll get what you want. I wonder how that will continue in season 4. So in episode 1, Clay and co show up to school to find that metal detectors have been implemented at the entry doors. Every student entering the school must walk through the detector and, if necessary, have their bags searched and undergo a pat-down. Jess, finding there are no female officers available to deliver said pat-down, complains directly to a surprisingly receptive Principal Bolan. Their resulting conversation sets up a weird premise that the show never delivers on. Bolan tells her, to paraphrase, "As the student body president, I would like you to let me know what people think about the changes we're making. I want to know what your fellow classmates think of cameras and metal detectors in their hallways." And then he adds, in the first extreme, "Will she rat on Alex?" drip feed that goes absolutely nowhere. "Also, please tell me in confidence if you have anything I should know that I can help with." And she gives him this lingering look like she's considering coming clean about Bryce's death, and then it is never brought up again. Jess is super evasive about this conversation with Annie and the rest of Hands Off, who, side note, the writing seems to have forgotten Tyler is a member of in the 1-month time skip. Anytime anyone asks Jess what she was talking to Bolan about, she deflects conspiratorially as though she's hiding this deep betrayal. The conversation was very benign. A retelling of this meeting would absolve her. This is done with the intention later of making Jess's secrecy come off like a wrong that she needs to apologise for and make right. There's no reason it needed to be a secret, and she had no reason to apologise, so the tone of this storyline is so jarring. I keep looking at this character being judged as though she's some sleeper agent co-conspirator, working for the fascist overlords of Liberty High, but she's not really doing anything wrong. She's not doing anything right, sure, but her character goes through a damning fall from grace that contrasts with what we see on screen by light years. Anything she could be doing off-screen, like secret meetings with Bolan where she actually does encourage these measures, have to be assumed by the viewer, with the only evidence being the way her relationships disintegrate with her friends. It often feels like we're watching half a show. Were scenes cut, or did they just forget to include them? See, by episode 3, Bolan has totally gotten out of line. Cameras have been installed in the hallways. Annie comments that this is a total violation of privacy, having CCTV in the hallways at school. Jess believes that it makes schools safer, an attitude presented to us as authoritarian and wrong. The thing is, if CCTV was in the changing rooms or toilets, that would be a total violation of privacy. But having CCTV in a public walkway, the corridors of your school, is such an established practice that I'm stunned it is being introduced to Liberty High just now. The cast act like this is Big Brother. Jess is obviously annoyed by the metal detectors and the later inclusion of armed officers in the corridors, especially when they start pointing more guns than any student ever has, and she's not one to keep that quiet. Jess is historically very outspoken. She doesn't mind the cameras, but I don't know many people who would mind CCTV in hallways. When Bolan moves to install CCTV in the locker room later in the series, Jess does stand up against that. It's just when we need her to have a very catastrophic and very avoidable fall from grace that we find her lacking in the mouth department.
Do you think you should? Speak up? Think it would make things better or worse?
We don't see Jess discussing this with Bolan at all, and the show leaves this intentionally ambiguous, but this means that we the audience have no idea how much she is to blame, if at all. If she is in these meetings, would she really be quietly nodding along with all the proposals for new security measures? Is that what Jess does? Would a student body president even be able to veto the integration of security measures in the school? Is Bolan not just doing this and leaving the door open for feedback? But we never see her giving any feedback, positive or otherwise.
Bolan asked me to give him my input on the security measures.
Wait, so you've been helping him?
By episode 7 we find that the student body, later revealed to be only male students, have begun a petition to force her to resign, claiming she was responsible for the school shooter drill and Clay's subsequent breakdown. All Jess really needs to say here was, I was not responsible for that. But she doesn't. She acts like she was responsible, like she did approve it before it began. Maybe there's some cut scene from the show where she did have a meeting with Bolan and give him her blessing to perform a school shooter drill with zero warning, but if she had, why would she not know it was happening? During the drill we find her crying alone in the HO office and calling her parents to say goodbye, believing it to be a real shooter and believing her phone call to be her actual last words with her family. The shooting becomes Jess's call to action. In episode 8 she comes clean to her fellow members of Hands Off, revealing that Bolan asked for her feedback on security measures, and the group take that to mean that she is completely responsible for their integration. She makes amends for this narratively and literally. Narratively, she is punished because she is the only member of the main cast who finds she has been rejected from all of her college applications, including Clay, who gets into Brown because he gets perfect grades, and a slew of extracurricular accolades despite having multiple mental breakdowns and rarely, if ever, concentrating on his schoolwork. Zach, who purposefully fails the year but scrapes a college admission by sending in a video audition, and Alex, who could not give a shit if he tried. Don't worry, this show refuses to have any character finish this series on the back foot, so she magically manages to squeeze into the extremely selective UC Berkeley at the last minute by writing an essay about her activism, but this only happens once she has learned her lesson and made amends. And how does Jessica make amends? By putting everything on the line to get prom back.
Punish me. Fine. But don't cancel prom.
To do this, Jess needs to have the gang violence indictment against the school revoked by a group of disgruntled parents. She does this by taking the rap for a riot, which occurs on school property following the cruel negligence of the school shooting, which would require her having the associated charges levied against her instead.
You know that'll destroy your college admissions.
Maybe.
She also cites the number of POC students disproportionately targeted by on-site police officers as part of her soft threat to get Bolan to acquiesce. Only when he asks her for proof, she goes, I could prove it if I wanted to, implying that she's bluffing and throwing any point the show initially tried to make about police racism into some melting pot of good apple bullshit.
Were disproportionately singled out in the questioning.
Do we know that they were?
Do you really want to count?
Jess's storyline follows on from her storyline in the previous seasons, where the ultimate message has always been, all activists are hypocrites working with the state, they're not to be trusted, and any activism isn't worth your time because the people in charge are fundamentally corrupt and will never make meaningful change. Only now it's also poisoned by a story that can't decide whether she's a pawn or an active saboteur, and so won't commit to either. The school shooter drill episode leads to the Riot episode, where the student body of Liberty High decide that they are fed up with being thrown around like ragdolls by people of authority. This episode was one of the most covered episodes of season 4, and you've likely heard a lot of other people talking about it. I personally found it an episode of pure narrative fatigue. I was exhausted just from watching this. I was so exhausted that I will quick fire my thoughts. The riot occurs following 2 major incidents: rising and unresolved tension from the fake drill from the previous episode, and a moment where Dominican student Diego is racially profiled by a police officer and subjected to disproportionate violence by said police officer, who ends up pointing a gun at him and Justin. The other named character police officers are nowhere to be seen, and Officer Wynn even saves Tony from being arrested, going for the not all cops one bad apple message, effectively making propaganda. The students of Liberty High, fed up with being punching bags for officers and potential shooters alike, stage an impromptu walkout. The chant they choose is "Hey hey ho ho, the SROs have got to go," which is the recycled chant that HO used when protesting the football match in season 3. It's not lost on me how recycled this chant is, nor how HO were the bad guys for protesting last season. When riot police arrive and begin to shunt the students off the grounds, the students begin fighting the police instead of walking away. Obviously, this was not an officially organised protest, so no one knew what to do, but there's something intentionally metaphorical in the way that they used their school shooter training, throwing books and whatever's in their bags, at the encroaching riot police. None of the stuff thrown actually harms the police. The Modern World by The Jam begins to play, with lyrics like "What kind of fool do you think I am? You think I know nothing of the modern world. All my life has been the same. I've learned to live by hate and pain." It stirs up this whitewashed kids fight back atmosphere that feels like a scene from a Jimmy Neutron movie. Kids like Cyrus are shoved to the ground and arrested as they cheer and laugh. Despite being battered with police shields and roughly arrested, no one gets so much as a bruise. This whole scene has a very harmless, playful vibe to it. It's not intended to be taken as what it is, and what it represented as an episode released during the BLM protests. As with every other scene of any kind of social theme intertwined in this season, it's played off without consequence as a silly little runaround for a bunch of actors who are probably just there for the paycheck by this point. As students begin to flee the violence, Clay jumps up on a car with a megaphone and makes a few statements about how they're forced to live in a society. His character reeks of sheltered privilege, and he's the least likely person on that cast to have anything of value to say. The students return and the riot gets even worse. They're so awed by his speech that he gets voted as the school speaker at graduation and nominated to make the final speech to the graduating class, a speech that has to be fully vetted by the school administration. The security measures plotline is sort of intertwined with a slightly different, totally divorced from reality plotline I've got in my notes as the tracking subplot. As with all subplots on this show, it does have a beginning, a middle, and an end, but all are ill-defined. It's just there to serve as an extra complication to the main plot, something the characters never quite get around to dealing with. It has its reveals, which fall flat, and its twists, which are ultimately meaningless. Clay and Justin receive phones from their parents on Christmas Day, in episode 1, loaded with all the hot new apps. He then sees his parents in the kitchen with Sheriff Diaz, who is talking them through some new security measures for the school. When we learn there's this huge syndicate of parents all pooling money for metal detectors and cameras, we realise Diaz has visited each of them to talk them through the program. But he visits Clay's parents long after they've bought the phones with the tracking apps, which skews the timeline a bit out of order. Like, they've already invested in the brand new phones, probably $1,000 each. And how did the other parents get the apps onto their kids' existing phones without issue? Only in episode 5, when Clay's dad mysteriously finds him at exactly the location he went on a worryingly long run to, the place Bryce died, so he can flash back to a memory he personally didn't live, will you start to realise that his parents are tracking him somehow, and it's probably the phone. Matt asks Justin why he was visiting his old neighbourhood, something he shouldn't have known. Jessica Davis's dad tells her that he knows there's a party this weekend, indicating he has access to her texts. In episode 6, Dean Foundry comments that Clay arrived at school today at 9:47, a detail that perplexes Clay. I would assume he checked all their CCTV, but this is apparently another smoking gun of the tracking subplot.
Love does not thrive in an atmosphere of complete paranoia, so anyone who thinks Valentine's Day at a high school is a genuine show of love probably also thinks that airport security actually has anything to do with security.
Clay tells Jess and Justin and Alex and everyone that he believes their parents are tracking them. One such meeting takes place in Monet's, under the watchful eye of a CCTV camera that the shot lingers on, dragging into focus like Big Brother is watching them even here. The tracking subplot resolves itself when Clay's parents realise that tracking him upsets him, and they stop and apologise. If this subplot had been better defined or more pressing, I think I'd have been annoyed about that, but it's so half-effort that you can tell the show doesn't really care how it wraps it up either, just flings out the story and shrugs its shoulders at you, appalled that you expect better. I think this subplot tore open the premise of this show because it demonstrated just how fucked the stakes are. A core cast of immense privilege and wealth frame their murder on someone else, the victim being an evil kid of even greater wealth and privilege. Tony and Annie excluded, whose parents are also suspiciously too absent to be expected to cough up for the tracking devices, we see a series in which the biggest day-to-day problem for these teenagers is that their school has installed CCTV in the corridors because all of the graffiti and the violence that they're doing. A core cast that includes an aspirational school shooter are disgusted when the school said shooter planned to target now has metal detectors.
Well, my involvement was instigated by an oppressive police state trampling on students' rights.
Really? In the Marines, I did a tour on the Korean DMZ. I'll tell you about a police state sometime.
I waited a bit too long to cover Season 3 after covering Season 2, and ended up forgetting enough of it that I missed out on making some broader points that would have been so good you would have subscribed on the spot, I promise. And maybe even taken a peek at my Twitch channel, where we just got the 10-star run on Silent Hill 2, or my second channel where I do more gaming related videos for fun with my brother, or my Patreon which has a Patreon-only podcast and a bunch of cool sneak peeks on upcoming projects. So we'll cover Season 4 now for maximum hindsight judgment. Did you get it? Were the hints subtle? The concept of being the children of immigrants for Annie and Tony is something that, like a lot of plot beats in Season 4, is glossed over, condensed, and returned to us all neat and tidy, void of any worthwhile discussion or perspective. So, by the end of Season 3, Tony's parents have been forcibly taken by ICE and sent back to Mexico. Generally speaking, although we know this is a best-case scenario, undocumented immigrants have due process rights and can challenge their deportation in an immigration court. If they lose, they can appeal. The thing about Tony is that he was born on American soil, rendering him an American citizen. So the show can't start a conversation about immigration through Tony, and they have to use his parents as a proxy. As far as we know, this is the process that Tony's parents go through, only because we see the situation only through Tony, and we never ever see his parents, their lawyers, or any of the legal proceedings beyond what Tony receives in letters. It's hard to nail down precisely what happens. The process seems to be there, but vague and compressed, to account for far more interesting storylines, like whatever Clay is doing. By the end of Season 3, Tony's parents are miraculously safe, reunited, and living well in picturesque Mexico, perfectly happy. There's no discussion as to how awful it would be to have your entire life forcibly uprooted and taken from you by the state. This is what is bad about forced deportation, not necessarily the deportation itself. And despite making a point to write an entire subplot about forced deportation, 13 Reasons Why refuses to examine the complexities of this on any level. There's no examination of the process, the struggles, the misery, and the dehumanization. There's a real human cost to the immigration crackdown, but as with everything else, it's whitewashed and swept under the rug by a show that wants brownie points for bringing it up, but can't be bothered to go through a process of actually depicting it in any kind of useful way. Seeing immigrants in a situation where they aren't dehumanized might be very useful for an average viewer, but fuck that, we have more important stories to tell, like how Clay loses his virginity to Sheriff Diaz's daughter and nuts in like 2 seconds. With that storyline neatly wrapped up in a bow by the end of Season 3, and Season 4 insisting on continuing a story that was basically already done, we see the fallout of the fallout. Tony appeals on behalf of his parents, is denied, and as a man whose violent past has always landed him in trouble, Tony realises that he is going to need to find an outlet for his emotions on the topic without resorting to violence. So he starts boxing in tournaments, and it does not feel like proper regulated boxing either. Tony is conscripted into boxing during the false profiling incident I mentioned way back when. He is stopped by a smug police officer, only unlike the officers of last season who would unfairly search and even arrest him, specifically because of his name and the colour of his skin. This police officer is secretly a good cop. Once the show has got you on high alert, Officer Wynn suddenly shows how nice he is, and don't you feel bad for being a police racist, assuming this police officer would be unkind. How bigoted. The police officer sees Tony's latent rage and invites him to his amateur boxing club. Tony wins 3 fights against 3 opponents who all explicitly lie about their weight just to be able to fight smaller opponents and have a natural advantage. One of them is a white supremacist who tells Tony that he is going to kill him. At first, I assumed Tony, whose whole arc has been about walking away from violence, as it is only harmful, would look at these 3 fixed matches and go, no thank you, walking away from the danger. But no, he wins the first fight, he wins the second fight, and the third fight against the white supremacist, I was like, okay, this is where his lesson comes, or where he realises he's made a fatal mistake. But no, he wins that fight too with 0 issues. As I watched the first fighter knock him pillar to post with direct shots to the head, I briefly wondered if his story would be about CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is a kind of early onset dementia that occurs as a result of frequent head injuries and is seen in more violent sports. But I thought, hey, CTE takes like 10 years to develop, so they'll definitely not make it happen across the course of a few months. When Caleb visits Tony during his first fight, they identify him to Officer Wynn and the rest of the boxing club as Tony's trainer, implying that being openly gay would be a major issue. Only after the third fight, the two jump up on stage and share a passionate kiss. The camera spins around them as they kiss, a metaphor for all the eyes on them at once, and then everyone is cool with it and nobody cares. Tony gets a scholarship to the university. He turns it down initially because he wants to hold on to his father's future. His father calls him and tells him to go to university. Tony sells the garage to Javi and Caleb, so he technically still owns it in some capacity, then accepts his fully funded scholarship and his money and drives off into the sunset, having earned it through corrupt pro-am boxing violence. In short, his storyline was at best useless and at worst stupid. Annie's storyline also could have had some promising attributes this season and didn't, because talking about bad things that need to be solved is very hard. So the reason Annie is here in the United States is because her mother moved here as a live-in assistant. Now this is where setting 13 Reasons Why in North San Francisco becomes an issue. Sure, Evergreen County is fictional, but that's the Alfred Zampa Memorial Bridge, easily confused with the Golden Gate Bridge, which is less than an hour's drive away. In short, we know that place has a median house price of $500,000, and that's only because Vallejo, where the show is filmed, is one of those American towns where you'll have streets of the super rich with only 1 degree of separation from streets of the super poor. Either way, you've placed your fictional town in a very recognizable part of the United States, so you might call it Evergreen County, but I am looking at Vallejo, a place only the wealthy can afford to live, not just survive. Bryce and Nora Walker's house likely cost around $700,000, and that's where Annie and her mother moved to directly from the UK in a migration 1 step off indentured servitude. They would not be able to live anywhere within spitting distance of this place otherwise without living in squalor, and this places Annie in a situation of major instability. They had a home there for as long as Nora Walker's father was dying, resting their living situation on a man's dying situation, a tragedy for all involved for different reasons. The show never addressed this nor ever seemed to consider it. Their place in the USA was reliant on her mother's working visa, placing Annie in a far more tricky situation than even Tony. By the start of season 4, Annie's mother has miraculously found work in Oakland, a neighborhood even more wealthy than Vallejo, with house prices skyrocketing beyond the $1 million mark. She wants Annie to move there too. Does this mean she is somehow living there herself, able to have her daughter move over there too? Or is she again having to live in a rich person's home? What does it say about a Kenyan mother's only recourse for a life in the United States is to be a live-in servant? What does she think about that? Since her board is covered, what is she paid? And since she is employed directly by individual families, what benefits does she have? Will a millionaire family cover her insurance? Would they give her sick days and personal days? Or is she at their whim 24/7? When Annie's mother takes a fall so nasty that Annie has to go and live with her for several episodes, there's not a peep of what this means regarding medical costs and the wider ramifications of being able to perform her live-in servant duties. Annie goes and then she comes back, and that's that. 13 Reasons Why accidentally sets up a situation where half of its cast are incredibly wealthy, privileged people, and half of its cast are one nasty fall away from financial ruin and even deportation, and then does nothing with it. Justin, who was adopted out of homelessness and prostitution by Clay's family, expresses concern about enrolling in a college more expensive than community college because Clay's parents have only saved one college fund, and it's likely going to Clay, and probably will since Clay goes to the $87,000 a year Brown University like it's nothing.
So, no sweat, you'll just go to Occidental.
If I go to Sanderson, it's free.
Well, you don't have to go just because it's free. We're not poor.
When Clay hears Justin's concerns, he says to him, "It's no big deal, my parents will pay." And in that moment I realised I was watching the most perspective-devoid person on the planet make mistake after mistake after mistake, burn every bridge and treat people around him like shit because of symptoms of an undefined mental illness he refuses to tell anyone about, allowing everyone around him to constantly clean up his mess. His dad organises him a one-to-one meeting with the Dean of Admissions for the fictional Sanderson University, where he works, ultimate Nepo connection, and event, Clay skips it because he skipped the tour to get drunk with fraternity boys and then blames Zach for not at all making him do it, nor really even inviting him. He has his college admission essay written for him by Annie, a selfless act with nothing but good intentions that he never repays, and he screams at her for controlling his life, despite the fact that seconds ago he was on the verge of a breakdown, worrying that he'd accidentally submitted his How I Covered Up a Murder essay. He smokes pot at a party and then screams at Justin when he tries to intervene.
Your mom and dad.
Yeah, my mom and dad. They're not your fucking parents, so stop pretending they are.
Sorry, when am I supposed to care about this guy again? Annie is accepted into every university she applies for, but none of them offer full scholarships and tuition, meaning she either walks away from a life-defining career opportunity or takes on loans she could never dream of paying back. Nora Walker, having saved for Bryce's now moot college fund, offers to fully fund Annie's time at university. That's life-changing. Tony reminds her to take it because of her immigrant status. Instead, Annie asks that Nora invest in HO, the hands-off activism group at her school. Instead of having $62,000 a year covered at Stanford, no worries, by a woman who earnestly wants to fund her future, Annie has her invest that money into an after-school club that makes posters to hang at football games. This show is so fantastically sanitized that Annie cannot accept financial assistance to study at one of the most prestigious institutions in the United States because it's all about making it alone. Her conclusion is a tragedy. Also, during this scene, Alex is also standing outside the window for no reason whatsoever, and he snaps a photo of them to show Jess later. This is not explained, and it is barely even relevant. Annie is forgotten, and Tony's story is whitewashed to weed out all the icky poor people immigrant stuff. Annie's problems don't just end with her shrugged-off immigration experience. In Season 3, she was an object injected into the story to serve as a selfish pick-me that would exonerate Bryce the serial rapist and enable Clay's main character syndrome by standing by his side as loyal inner voice, exposition delivery service, and mediocre white man idolizer. She didn't have her own stuff going on. Once she'd facilitated each man's arc, she didn't have much to do anymore. I felt sorry for her and her actress, who received a ton of misplaced fan backlash despite her merely reading an absolutely dogshit script. Season 4 begins as though it's going to follow the same course of events. Annie is literally represented to us as the good part of Clay's conscience.
You can't save everyone. You have to put your own mask on first.
Sometimes I think this show forgets the two of them have been together for like a month.
You look just as handsome as the first day I met you.
She spends the first few episodes feeding into his delusions.
So then why has he done anything yet? Why aren't we all in jail already?
Maybe he doesn't have any proof.
Maybe that's why he's here.
What I actually appreciated about this season is that, unlike Season 3, this is not depicted as being a good thing. While Season 3 saw fairy godmother Annie come in and essentially serve as Clay's right arm, her humanity coming secondary to whatever odd shit he wanted to get up to. In Season 4, the writing actually begins to consider, what would this mean for your actual girlfriend if you did this? In fact, in a conversation with his therapist, Dr. Ellman mentions offhand that Clay doesn't love Annie, implying that Clay has already divulged this information. Clay confirms he has never been in love.
What about Hannah?
Yeah, for a long time I thought I was in love with her. And when you see people for who they really are, the fantasy goes away, and then so does the love.
Me when I read Nietzsche for the first time. Clay frankly does not care about this woman, and is more willing to admit that than half the other things plaguing him. I'm really glad 13 Reasons Why didn't go for the stale, you can't be loved until you learn to love yourself message, which I think is bogus. It's not Annie sitting there trying to love a man who can't be loved. It's a man with a mental illness who totally emotionally neglects her and puts himself first every step of the way. And I'm not trying to suggest that mental illness makes you too broken to be loved either. My boyfriend has bipolar too, but he always puts me first when it matters. Clay is a flawed person, and those flaws are exacerbated by a mental illness he seems to be receiving insufficient care for. He is so wrapped up in caring about himself that he sidelines Annie at every opportunity.
I was hoping we could talk about us and everything.
Okay, I gotta go. Why do I take care of my friends? They need me.
For the first half of the season, Clay is harassed by some mystery figure I initially assumed would be some self-imposed hallucination. I was genuinely surprised when this guy existed. The gang have all kinds of assumptions about the caller's identity, namely Hillcrest reject Winston, who claimed to be hellbent on finding out the truth about Monty, but ended up just making friends and assimilating for the first few episodes of the season. Like, Winston just got involved. This confused plotline culminates in the mystery caller calling Clay with really ill-defined threats, obviously zero evidence. Clay had nothing to do with Monty besides making the entire ordeal his own business. Clay, being Clay, freaks out anyway, at the dance, leaving Annie crying and begging for him to hang out with her without making it about some cryptic bullshit for once.
Clay, just let it be over. Don't answer.
Hello?
Get the fuck out of there. Now.
Naturally, Clay is so self-absorbed that he blames everything else, even blaming love as a concept before looking inward.
Love has only fucked up my life. And God knows, love has made my closest friends question me. Fuck love.
Clay frustrates me because this season retrofits so much about the previous to make him more of a central figure than he ever was. There's a moment where he jogs to the pier Bryce died on and stands there having flashbacks to memories he physically wasn't present for, as though he's reliving Bryce's death, and they had nothing to do with it. The main problem we have with this season is that Clay is finally our main character and narrator. He's arguably been the main character all along, or at least the sun around which the planetary Liberty Highcast orbit, but his inner workings have been separated from us by virtue of other characters taking on the narrative mantle, and that works. Because Clay is the golden child of this series, the writing is very reluctant to ever let him fail, so no matter what he does and what happens, he always needs to be the good guy, and he always needs to leave situations extremely successful. This season sees him trip and fall into a nervous breakdown that sees him hospitalized, but he will still leave the series having flown through admissions into a comfortable place at Brown University, one of the top universities in the country, tuition and such paid for comfortably by his extremely rich parents. I don't know where he found the time to study amidst all the jump scares this season was lathering on him. Yes, season 4 of 13 Reasons Why has Monty-themed jump scares, but this guy basically fucks around in a field all season, and at the end we're told that he's lived this secret off-screen double life where he showed up to all his classes and aced all his assessments. A major factor in this issue is Clay's mental illness, which is now firing on all cylinders. Clay exhibits hallucinations, panic attacks, full nervous breakdowns, he disassociates, he loses time. Whatever he's dealing with, the symptoms are vast. And I say whatever he's dealing with because Clay's mental illness is never defined to us, and I think it would be far more beneficial for us to know for certain. This show used to pretend to give a shit about being an educational tool, and Clay struggles with something initially broached with caution, but now I feel as though Clay's mental illness is ill-defined so that the show can basically use it to serve whichever narrative purpose it wants in that particular moment. He's also so desperately loved by the writing that even when he disarms a police officer and begins waving a gun around, even when he tells his therapist that seeing an unconscious girl made him hard, and even when he realizes he has another personality, so to speak, that comes out and takes over, making him petrol bomb cars and walk the streets at night to commit acts of vandalism, his therapist still explicitly deems him not a threat and not in need of hospitalization. Like, I like Clay, but he disassociates so hard that he has no memories of blowing up cars in the school car park. He crashes Zach's car with both of them in it, almost killing them. This kid is a danger. Is it really so hard to allow that?
Lately, it's like I'm watching myself in the movie of my life. It's like I'm removed from reality.
Symptoms appear and disappear depending on what the writing wants Clay to do. Do you want some mysterious vigilante to torment the town, but dangle the thread about who of the cast it is? Give him symptoms of dissociative identity disorder, so that he has some other personality he goes into whenever he's upset, and sometimes when he's not, to wreak havoc on the school but still have Clay be none the wiser. Need a dead character to provide more context to a situation Clay wouldn't otherwise be able to piece together himself. Have him hallucinate them, so that they can say what needs to be said. Need horror elements to raise tension. Have him hallucinate jump scares, showers of blood, and the crying, bleeding body of his dying ex-classmate. Need to fabricate drama based on nothing and with very few actual consequences. Give him mood swings, have him lash out at people. What could have been a promising instance of representation, an actual on-screen character with schizophrenia, now becomes a writing crutch that permits anything out of the ordinary under the guise of mental illness, lampshaded by a few perfunctory therapy scenes, but no actual diagnosis, medication, or earnest hospitalization for a mental illness so bad that it has Clay disassociating and setting cars on fire, then having no memory of it. He shits himself on purpose to escape the psych ward. Have you ever tried to pee yourself or poop yourself? Your body doesn't let you do it. It is very, very hard to soil yourself on purpose. That is as much a symptom of an extremely fragile mental state as anything else he does. Our result is a main character who is an active danger to everyone else around him and then pontificates on it in his own narration.
And they claim the college application is so they can get to know you as a person. It's bullshit. The whole point is to force you to face, in writing, the complete fucking mess you've made of your life. I don't know why they bother asking. It's not like you have a choice. There are no choices. Shit just keeps happening, and all you can do is react. Going back to school after a 2-week suspension, it's like coming back from war.
Making Clay the narrator and the main character of this season was such a mistake. Firstly, the events taking place are only related to Clay as a consequence of his being friends with the actual people at the actual centre of things. A season focused on Jess or Justin might have worked better even if Clay narrated it. Before, there was always a degree of separation. It would be someone else's story, but Clay would narrate. This allowed him to comment on things as he observed them. In Season 4, Clay being the main character means he is only able to narrate things as they occur to him, which explains why his narration is 90% fluff. This guy has nothing of value to say because very little is actually happening to him. He feels like the centre of this galaxy, and he behaves as though he is, but he isn't. A writing choice that only serves to make him seem self-obsessed and delusional. Side note, but Clay's narration is delivered to us sometimes as audio from his therapy sessions, sometimes as a college admission essay, but never well or naturally. You only get an hour in your therapy session to discuss what's bothering you, spending 20 minutes circling the drain with vague phrases like, if you're afraid and you can't say why, then one story is as good as another. Your mind takes the story and tells it to you over and over until it might as well be real. You just pissed away like a dollar. You can't sit there prototyping verse. All the narration in this series feels like it was intentionally written to be posted in Tumblr GIFs. It's Instagram poetry narration. At first I thought maybe Clay speaks in these weird ways because he doesn't want to be specific with his therapist, but in one scene his therapist literally says, that's a very non-specific answer from a very specific young man, which establishes Clay as a man who is very direct in his statements, very literal, maybe not honest, no, but it puts his hollow narration into context as something he literally does not do. At the end of it all, long after their breakup, Annie speaks to Clay.
I think you have this ideal of what a girl should be, and you push me away when I turned out to be something different.
She nailed the last part, to be fair. Annie is a rock and a mother for the most mediocre men in her school, let's be real, but it was weird for them to make this about her gender, and Clay's perception of her gender. He pushes her away because he's a melodramatic narcissist who believes that only he can solve problems that have nothing to do with him, and genuinely thinks everyone around him is so stupid that they can't be trusted even with the knowledge of what's happening in his life. Hey, at least Clay nails it.
I wasn't ready for a relationship. I didn't know how to be in one. Still don't.
That's true and very fair. Alright, Clay. I like the way their relationship breakdown is framed. Clay doesn't lose Annie because of his own struggles. He loses Annie because he places drama ahead of her at every opportunity. His priority is, as it always has been, to start shit and be in the shit and to talk about shit. Annie served him well when she was there to instigate with him, follow him around like a puppy, but now that she wants to settle down and cuddle most evenings, Clay drops her like a lead weight.
But then a friend needed me, and it was like I was alive again. If it gets rough, you stop them, ask for a lawyer, and call me.
Still, Annie's character begins to fork here and it creates serious friction. Physically, she takes a major step back from events, like she's ready to hang up her detective hat, but the main cast still talk about her as though she's the glue that holds everyone together.
Is this what you do? Just come in and save everyone's lives and leave. Like you're some superhero who's like above it all.
In fact, Annie is written out of a third of the season. Jess in one episode has a throwaway line suggesting that Annie's absence is a sign of her guilt. She's clearly messing with us from afar, but it's abandoned immediately, and never treated with any kind of seriousness by the story. Annie's second purpose is to watch her relationship sink, like the captain of the Titanic. Her third purpose is to buzz around the new character Winston like a fly, as he's here to investigate Monty's framing and his death. She, the person who personally framed Monty, would naturally be concerned. Unlike Clay, she has something to lose if Winston discerns the truth. Unfortunately, 13 Reasons Why drops Annie like a crock of shit, likely because of all the backlash against her character. Like when Disney actresses get harassed and Disney just drops them from the movie rather than standing by them, Annie's character becomes this vestigial limb. She has a few conversations with Winston that appear promising, as though she will have more to do with him later, but these never develop beyond your typical, I have an inkling that Monty's framing was your fault, and then Annie saying something like, you don't have anything, before they walk off from one another, like Oblivion NPCs. She catches Alex and Winston making out and tells the group, leading to their breakup when Alex realises Winston's past. And yes, if you were wondering, Alex still kisses like he's trying to swallow his partner whole. Annie has some animosity with Jess after moving in with her to finish the rest of her school year. Annie warns Jess that her new boyfriend Diego, yes, she and Justin break up again, the man investigating Monty's framing, might spell trouble for the group. Jess throws back in her face that she, Annie, had sex with Bryce, the man who raped her. Very harsh. They make friends in time for prom and go together. Annie drops details about her sexuality that just kinda get left there, but that's just real life, I guess. Not everyone needs to turn to the camera and state their exact preference.
Man, I believe I had a crush on you since the first time I saw you going mental at a student council meeting.
She asks Estella a few half-hearted questions as she joins them at HO. Estella asks her a few back, and the two are there without their male anchor counterparts, so they have no function. They're like two androids without the men they orbit. Now no longer in service to any man on the main roster, Annie is mostly scrubbed from the show. There's this moment in the final episode where Alex says,
I just wanted to say, I think you saved my life too, so thank you.
And the camera is pointing at Zach and Annie, and honestly, I didn't know which one of them he was speaking to until Annie said, "Me too." I actually feel as though this scene was framed intentionally in case they wanted to film Zach responding, as though Alex was speaking to him instead, and they trialed both and felt like Annie's response was better, so they kept that. Annie unwillingly serves this show really poorly because she demonstrates that anyone who decides to stop meddling in other people's business and just get on with their lives without creating drama actually has no place on the cast anymore. She grows up and learns to stop letting herself get sucked into Clay's bullshit, and consequently isn't involved in events. Like, you totally can just walk away and be fine. Unlike Season 3, which gave us nothing in the way of clues as to Bryce's killer's reveal, eventually pinning it all on Alex as a huge fuck you to anyone who might have been personally invested in figuring out who it was, Justin's death is foreshadowed by a lesion which develops on his neck later in the season. That's one foreshadow, which overshadows Alex's zero foreshadow, but beyond that there's zero indication as to the identity of the person who dies at the end of this season. So Justin dies in the final episode. As with the Alex reveal of Season 3, I had people in my comment section telling me that Justin would die of AIDS since my video on Season 1. I didn't mind having the ending ruined, considering this is a show I lost love for back in Season 2, but this gave the added benefit of allowing me to keep an eye out for this downward spiral as I watched. Justin gets a lesion on his neck towards the latter half of the series, but you might not put two and two together at first. He gets into a big fight with sort of antagonist Diego the episode before, and gets various cuts and bruises along the way, so it's not obvious where it's come from. He doesn't begin exhibiting any kind of ill health until episode 9, which is the same episode he collapses in, when he begins to show flu-like symptoms that he assumes are drug withdrawals, as he's using again. Considering his funeral isn't so much teased as it is thrust upon the viewer back in episode 1, I do think it is so cheap to have the source of that funeral be a lazily written twist. And it is lazily written, so let's unpack it. I found it very contrived that Clay and Justin spend much of Season 4 at odds with each other over petty bullshit compared to Season 3, when they would have died for each other. As early as Episode 1, we see Clay refuse to visit Justin in rehab, moodily commenting that he'll see him when he gets back instead. Clay has always been selfish, and we discussed the ways that selfishness manifests in Season 4 already, but he and Justin were always a firm brotherly partnership. We see his half-hearted
"Welcome home"
when Justin returns. Their reunion was so awkward and so devoid of brotherly love that I assumed something had happened between them in the time skip, but nothing had. It was just how they were now. When Clay gets in trouble for standing over an unconscious drunk woman, he refuses to tell Justin why, even though Justin would totally understand. At every opportunity, Clay builds walls between him and his... they call each other brothers in the previous season, now they're just cellmates. Thing is, siblings aren't perfect. Sometimes you do get in a mood with each other, so I could see this as legitimate had it been explained in any kind of way. But there's no cause and effect, no reason why Clay suddenly can't stand to be around Justin, no reason why they can no longer look each other in the eye. Remember that Season 4 begins a month or so after the end of Season 3. These guys act like they've been estranged for years, and all it would take is a throwaway line to clue me in as to why, and dissolve the confusion. Was Clay upset at potentially having to share his college fund? Did they fall out again over Bryce? Did Justin sell some of his stuff when he was in active addiction? Nothing is said, so I was just confused and a bit annoyed at this massive 180-degree turn in their relationship. Clay screams at him during the camping trip.
Look, maybe you're not in the best place to handle that.
But you are. But you aren't even the same person anymore.
Clay makes horrible comments to him at a party when Justin catches him smoking weed.
Are you fucking kidding me? Look, Clay, I know I'm the last guy to tell you not to do drugs.
It's just weed. It's not like I'm shooting heroin in a fucking alley in Oakland.
They turn on each other over an assumed information leak when it's obvious that their parents are tracking their newly gifted phones with all the latest apps, and instead blame each other for tattling.
Then what were you doing in your old neighborhood?
You tell me! Because clearly you followed me and then ran straight home to rat me out to your parents.
I didn't follow you.
There's this one point where Clay has a panic attack and Justin half-heartedly asks him what's wrong, and I couldn't tell if the character had checked out or if Brandon Flynn was waiting for his curtain call. Whatever the source of this is, it's not clear. Whatever concrete trust these two characters had for each other in the previous season seems to have totally evaporated by the beginning of season 4 and is never addressed. Their relationship is just fundamentally different for some reason, and I think that's quite lazy. Still, it is what it is, and with the knowledge that Justin would die, I assumed it could serve a greater purpose, but the writing is all over the place. I will explore why, but we need to lay some groundwork. Justin breaks up with Jess in episode 1 under the flimsy excuse that he needs to focus on his sobriety. Despite their originally ironclad partnership and star-crossed lover vibe, he wants to focus on himself and can't see Jess being any part of that. Jess and Justin have, by this point, adopted the same kind of farcical contrivance of a Bridget Jones movie. Only there are 4 of those movies now, and what appeared to be her unusual but adorable pairing with Mr. Darcy in the first movie had to be broken up and re-broken up and reunited, and he even marries someone else for a while, just so she can end up with him at the end of every single one of them. After a while, you start to think, maybe you two just aren't meant for each other, and that's the vibe I began to get from Jess and Justin by season 4. You see him break up with her because he has no time for her amidst all this focusing on himself, and you're like, maybe we should just call it a day. Maybe this isn't supposed to be. Still, with the foreknowledge that Justin was going to die of AIDS, I assumed that he was letting Jess go because he didn't want her to catch anything from him, that this was some self-sacrificing gesture intended to give her some peace of mind and allow her to move on before he succumbed to his illness. Combining that with Justin's isolation from Clay, I felt as though Justin knew about his AIDS from the beginning and was distancing himself from others purposefully. There are a few scenes where we catch the tail end of Justin speaking to Matt and Lainey about things that I felt were intended to be red herrings. After Justin's mum dies, an event that happens in isolation and with convenient timing, we catch him getting upset over the idea of having a service. And I was like, oh, the reveal is going to be that they were never talking about his mother. Her death was timed for this episode to facilitate a misdirection from Justin's own end-of-life plans. He'd even been visiting his old neighbourhood, I assumed to say one final goodbye to her. Turns out he was just relapsing. Justin even asks Matt and Lainey to not tell Clay while he's getting better. I was like, this is Justin getting his affairs in order. And all the more bittersweet it's going to be when Clay looks back on this season and realises how much time he squandered with his brother fighting over nothing, having arguments over nothing. This is going to be some big story about how you need to put aside worldly bollocks and make the most of the time we have on Earth, because anything can change at any moment. And maybe it is, but it's also completely not. Justin stays out most nights and comes in crying, sometimes to be caught by Clay. When he does this, he claims he was at Jess's house. I assumed he was just outside, looking at the stars, reflecting on his limited time. During the school shooter drill, he rushes across campus to be with Jess, saying,
"Look, if this is the last day of my life, I want to spend it with you."
He goes to meetings for his addiction, but just refers to them as his meetings, which leaves their purpose open to interpretation. I wondered if those meetings were also support groups for people with AIDS, specifically when he describes how his support group is full of old guys. He also goes back to drugs, which was tragic after his journey, but I assumed was some last-minute hedonism, some I have a month to live so I'm going to do what I want attitude. By the end of the series, the he's had a terminal illness for a long time angle was going strong. Everything pointed towards a reveal I was bitterly waiting for, only after Justin collapses at the end of episode 9, he and his family learn about his HIV only after he arrives in hospital. Now, I hate that Justin dies of AIDS. I don't mind that he dies, but I hate that he dies of AIDS. Firstly, logistically, Justin explicitly contracts HIV by having sex with men for money and injecting heroin with possibly contaminated needles, which occurred an in-universe year prior. Unmedicated HIV takes roughly 10 to 15 years to develop into AIDS, or between 5 and 20 in severe French cases. I had to flick through some articles to see if it could develop in 1 year with a severely weakened immune system, but it seems like the shortest incubation period is 5 years. As with many events in this season, well, I guess it could happen. At first I wondered if Justin contracted HIV as a child and had it incubate for 10 years since his various stepfathers molested him, but the show is pretty explicit on the cause of his HIV being his stint spent homeless the year prior. Presumably his mother would also have HIV if her past partners had it, and nobody says anything about it. Still, no, Justin places frequent emphasis on having sex with men for money. The doctor places emphasis on the fact that he got it from having sex with men for money. The doctor raises Justin's shame about that being the reason he didn't get tested since moving into the Jensen household. If you want to believe he caught HIV-1 as a child, you can, but it's not the theory supported by the show. The doctor they consult with suggests that Justin likely refused an HIV test with the Jensen's GP out of the shame associated with having sex with men, but I don't really buy it going undetected that way. Sure, he might not consent to a blood test with a GP, but Justin was admitted into a live-in live-in rehab facility for his heroin addiction. Surely blood work would be a mandatory condition of admission. Any one of those admitted could have HIV from sharing needles and whatever else, and surely you don't want any chance of the spread of that disease within your closed facility. Like, surely that's a class action lawsuit waiting to happen. I do not buy that a live-in rehab facility wouldn't test you for HIV as part of admission. The liability would be too great. Secondly, because the use of HIV is a sign to me that this show really doesn't stand for anything anymore. All that time spent insisting that 13 Reasons Why is trying to start a conversation, to depict real issues, to educate, and you treat HIV like stage 4 cancer? What in the 1980s misinformation is that? AIDS was first recognised almost 50 years ago. It was considered to be a disease that only affected gay people and drug addicts. People thought you could get it by kissing, sharing toothbrushes, even touching each other. Misinformation about AIDS was rife. In 1981, it was referred to as GRID, gay-related immune deficiency, or colloquially as the gay plague or even gay syndrome. Back before there was a cure for AIDS, people lived in fear. Some remarked it felt like there was a funeral every week. People avoided you. You could see they were embarrassed to talk to you. You didn't even dare to tell anyone you were gay. There was an advert that ran in the 1980s that depicted AIDS as the Grim Reaper, an indiscriminate killer that would come for anyone at any time. It was a decade of ignorance and misinformation. Today, you can live a normal lifespan with HIV. With medication, HIV will never develop into AIDS. Damn, if you catch it early enough, you can even prevent HIV in the first place. I think using AIDS as Justin's immediate terminal death sentence was gross. Not only does its depiction lean into the same fear-mongering bullshit that terrorized the gay community in the 1980s, and arguably still does, but it's also fundamentally wrong. Justin's death by AIDS is an unethical use of a real illness spun to fabricate a ridiculous twist. And other methods of death were there to use. Why didn't they do death by overdose? The season also seemed to have been written with that in mind too. It's bizarre to me that they went with he got AIDS after a few months of having HIV when they had set up so many other actually organic, equally bittersweet endings for Justin. Brandon Flynn himself spoke to the writers of this show to suggest his character's death, believing it would be the right course of action for his character, and I took that to mean he believed his character would relapse and overdose, because I agree. As I watched, I was like, okay, if we went the drug route, he's lost his core support system in Clay and Jess, meaning he has a lot to grieve and a lot of time on his hands. He has the coach, yes, but the coach meeting him once per week isn't enough to keep him busy and happy. He shoulders a ton of blame for being accepted into a college, and is fully aware that Clay's parents only saved one college fund. They've already paid for his rehab, and he's going to feel too guilty to accept this generosity. Not to be crass, but he is in the perfect position to relapse and overdose and conclude his storyline that way, as a grim reminder and a bitter loss of a beloved character. Obviously, they were going to go with the age reveal, so it wouldn't be an overdose, but I do wonder why they didn't kill him the latter way. They spent so much time setting up this decline into a relapse, into a fatal mistake, but went with fantasy black plague cancer death aids instead. Genuinely, the more I pick this apart, the more revolting it is. Most cheaply, Justin's death in the series is undercut by his inclusion as a ghost. Justin dies about a third of the way into episode 10, and I'd say his ghost is already back on the scene within 20 minutes. Clay spots Ghost Justin across the room, sitting and chatting to Ghost Bryce. Justin waves, and I thought, oh, that's a really bittersweet goodbye. Clay will glimpse him in a crowd and then look back and he's not there anymore, like how everyone looks like someone you've lost. How grief makes us see our loved ones everywhere without ever being able to touch them. That's so sad. And then Ghost Justin sits next to Clay and has a full conversation with him, explains stuff, talks him through stuff, and later he's in Clay's room talking about his college essay with Clay too, explaining his reasoning. There's no restraint with this writing. Justin's death is understandably very hard to watch, but there's no room for the audience to grieve. There's no sense of loss because he remains a major on-screen presence for the rest of the episode. There's no gap where he once was, and since Clay speaks to Justin entirely in isolation, there's no sense that Justin is a ghost. They're just talking to each other like normal. Also, Clay never has his moment of, I spent so much time this season being a miserable crab arse who put myself ahead of everyone and everything instead of focusing on my loved ones, because for Clay to learn a lesson would be to imply he was at fault in the first place, and naughty boys don't go to Brown, apparently. This show wants to have its cake and eat it, and to serve that end, it is unbelievably manipulative. Oh, but Justin's death was so sad. Watching any terrified, confused young man waste away on his deathbed as his friends and family grieve around him would make you cry. It's like accidentally running into a video of a pet being put down when you're scrolling Instagram reels. I don't know the pet, but I'll cry my eyes out anyway. It's not an achievement to make people cry, and after 4 years with Justin, I would find it bizarre if they somehow managed to write a death scene that wasn't sad. The show does this because it wants a tragic final moment for the season, but it also wants Clay to talk to Justin, so it brings him back as a ghost straight away. It's so cheap and lazy. When you kill a character, crucially, you can no longer draw on that character for dialogue and exposition. It's a limitation you place upon your work. You now have to work around their absence. but that would be hard, so we aren't doing it. Also, Justin's death scene has this super loud overlaid music track, breathy vocals and piano with extremely on-the-nose lyrics. I wish this show would just trust its actors to act, especially Brandon Flynn and Dylan Minnette, two actors who have absolutely earned the right to be trusted to carry a scene off their own backs. It's like the show is so scared that you might not realise a scene is sad that they have to shove music into anything that really would have worked so much better in silence. Either that or they're trying to find their next The Night We Met, which is equally as eye-rolling but for vastly different reasons.
Bring me something, take this pain away.
I called this part of the video obligatory Zack part because it feels as obligatory as Zack's inclusion. Unlike Courtney Crimson and Ryan Shaver and Chloe Rice and God knows who else, who concluded their parts of the tale and then either absconded from the show entirely or only came back for cursory chats here and there, someone clearly likes Zack enough to keep him involved as a major player. It's hard to judge Zack because, like Bryce, he's basically a changeling from previous seasons. It's not really the Zack we've grown to know over 3 seasons, it's just some new guy who looks exactly the same but behaves completely differently. In order to dredge up some new character arcs, again since we killed all of our villains, Zack has just become despondent and rebellious. He pre-games Justin's sobriety party, major dick move, and ruins Justin's surprise by bumbling in and distracting the group long enough that they don't notice Justin arrive. He attempts to enlist in the army despite Jess's dad's best advice. He initiates a fight between Justin and Diego and humiliates himself at the school dance. He encroaches on a fraternity party at a college tour, taking Clay with him and getting smashed. He takes Alex on some bizarre cringe tightrope walk, taunts the football team until they beat the shit out of him, and almost rapes his barely conscious prom date, but is interrupted by Charlie and Alex in the nick of time, just to name a few. By the way, that scene is bizarre. There's some stuff here worth looking into, like how his mum has become almost militantly obsessed over controlling his every move, to the point where she has put cameras in his room so she can watch him, but the most we get is just one very fed-up young man doing the opposite of everything he's ever cared about, and then pulling himself back together just in time to snag a last-minute place at a performing arts college through virtue of an audition tape. 13 Reasons Why is really averse to the concept of any of its cast taking a gap year. Everyone needs to be over the finish line, attending a top university by the time this series concludes. I assumed that Zack and Jess at the very least would take an extra year before reapplying, but 13 Reasons Why seems to consider anything less than unconditional university attendance to be a failure, which is the same logic that led many people into taking on degrees they didn't need and the immense debt to go with it. Yeah, I'm still bitter about that one. As I said before, this season does very little beyond attempting to wrap up the Monty story, which was also a wrap-up of the Bryce story, so we may as well explore how well it did that. Naturally, as Clay is our main character, Clay needs to be the person fielding the brunt of suspicion from all sides. He needs to be the person for whom the weight of the world rests on his shoulders. From the beginning, he is bombarded with a stunning amount of Monty jump scares, like this season has taken on the style of some kind of psychological thriller. Clay just wanders around Silent Hill, seeing his greatest traumas played out to him as he deteriorates. He sees Monty in every crowd, as does Jess. He gets panic attacks, which he refuses to tell anyone about.
Hey, you okay?
I think I just stopped too fast. It's like I can't breathe. Like my heart's gonna beat out of my chest. Like I'm gonna die.
He finds Bryce's death tape playing in his house and then sees the ghosts of Bryce and Monty walking away. He attends a frat party during a college tour and finds a girl passed out in a bed. Bryce's ghost goads him, suggesting Clay might be aroused by the sight of her, that he can't prove that he wouldn't be the kind of man who would take advantage of a drunk girl.
Oh, come on, you know you want to fuck her. And you know she wants you to, so...
The frat boys are understandably upset. College security is called, and Clay and Zack are detained. Clay admits to his therapist that seeing an unconscious woman makes him hard, and this is never discussed again. Was the initial implication that anyone can be the kind of person Bryce was? That the two have more in common than we thought? That the impulse to sexually assault others is universal, and that we shouldn't judge? Or that, spiritually, a part of Bryce has entered Clay to tempt him into evil? It doesn't matter. It never comes up again. But most importantly, Clay is told by his therapist in episode 1,
the body's incredibly intuitive. It will create all kinds of physical stimuli to force you to address a psychological problem. They're your mind telling you to pay attention. Are you ready to pay attention?
Here, the seed is planted that Clay's body is going to start acting out to force his mind to address things that bother him. So when things start to happen off-screen, vandalism reading Monty was framed on the admin door, an obvious confession, an email sent from Clay's email address threatening to come clean about Bryce's death, the cameras Clay vehemently opposes being smashed in the night, it's obvious to any viewer that the twist is going to be that it was Clay. The show does try to pin this on Winston a bit, but gives up almost immediately. Clay finds a smiley face spray painted inside his locker, spray paint cans in his bag, a graffiti tag on his own bedroom ceiling, a tag that has no meaning, by the way. I assume it's V to imply Valerie, Sheriff Diaz's daughter that Clay meets at a party and loses his virginity to. Oh yeah, that happens as well. Okay, yeah, I'll tell you this one. Clay meets a girl at a party, she reveals she's Diaz's daughter, they have sex. Clay admits he is losing his virginity in that moment, she implies it will happen again, it never happens again, we don't see her until a shot at the funeral where she smiles from a distance, she has a non-speaking part in that episode. It doesn't come up with any character, even Arnie, it marks no moment for Clay's character, nor does it change his perspective or behaviour to finally know the touch of a woman, and that's it. Maybe there's some original draft where it's supposed to be teased that she's some vigilante working on behalf of her dad, but whatever it was, it's long gone and nothing has taken its place. When Clay receives his invite for a Brown University College interview, he realises he, in a stressed daze, made his essay a confession on how he covered up a murder. This becomes a huge problem for Clay, who spends several episodes worrying about this. Only later it's revealed that Arnie found his application and completely rewrote it to be about something else, which is yet another off-screen convenience, and all the stakes we thought we were playing with are now totally dismantled. Clay sees his reflection grinning in the mirror, blinks, and it's suddenly the following morning. Clay just compares this immense loss of time to how you lose time by spending 6 hours a day at school.
But I guess that's high school, right? You show up at 7:50 a.m., leave at 2:40, and you're like, what the hell just happened?
Anyway, the football team torture him by phone into a nervous breakdown and then assume his nervous breakdown is evidence of his guilt, and then when that reveal is over they just leave him alone and stop trying to find evidence elsewhere. Winston returns from season 3 after his 2-night stand with Monty, and he's one of the strongest characters in the roster by virtue of the fact that 13 Reasons Why is actually comfortable with acknowledging how fucked up he is. He is the only character I felt deserved to see Monty's ghost. Winston loves Monty and then he loves Alex. He loves them both very, very much, and that's never something the show depicts as being correct, which I think is wonderful and surprisingly nuanced. Winston does this thing where he meets someone and idolizes them. He falls in love with an idealized version of that person hard and can become obsessive. This obsession leads him to Liberty High. Ugh, the idea of this guy swaying and fake dancing in a crowd made this scene so hard for me to watch. I had to remind myself repeatedly that they were actors in a scene because I couldn't even look. Anyway, Winston is booted from Hillcrest for cheating on his exams and winds up in Liberty High, despite offers from his mother to send him to another private school instead, as he sinisterly tells his mother, "I know people there." We get the distinct impression that Winston is going to Liberty High to learn the truth about Monty's death and to hold those responsible. After befriending Tyler by bonding over their shared photography hobby, Winston soon begins a relationship with Alex. All of this is taken with extreme concern by Annie and Clay.
I'm gonna talk to Alex. He's spending every minute with Winston.
Annie even confronts Winston in this really hollow way, and he responds equally hollow, and there should probably be more tension between the character seeking justice for Monty and the character who directly framed him, but this season has no idea what to do with Annie, and their relationship is abandoned faster than she was after she stopped being a plot crutch for Bryce's exoneration. Despite his initial sinister arrival, Winston just gives the impression of a man looking to make a new life for himself. He seems interested in making friends. When Clay gets a bunch of fake calls that I initially assumed were just hallucinations, he blames a very confused Winston. Winston withholds from mentioning Monty to his new friend Tyler because he can see how upset any mention of his name makes him. Alex realizes he's into men when a date with Winston awakens something in him, and the two begin a relationship. I thought they were super cute together and I loved the dynamic they shared. It's only when Alex dumps Winston over his assumed role as a sleeper agent, abandoning him out of nowhere on the camping trip, that Winston actually starts to seek vengeance.
So, Alex breaks up with me for no reason, and tonight at the campfire, every one of your friends wants to say something they don't say. So which one of them killed Bryce?
Side note, but Alex finishes the season in a relationship with Charlie, a character I actually came to really dislike. 13 Reasons Why attempts to write a black cat, golden retriever style dynamic between these two, but ends up making an ironic dog's dinner of the whole affair. Charlie is awful with Alex. The two meet at a party neither of them want to attend and bond over weed, cookies, loss, and old movies. This is the cutest they'll ever be, sharing teenage shit patter in a cordoned off room of some muck mansion. I think 13 Reasons Why is so intent on writing inefficient stories as efficiently as possible that it forgets to include scenes of characters just bonding, getting to know each other. I have no idea why Tony and Clay consider each other brothers. They sit next to each other at events, but you never see them just hanging out, maybe kicking a ball around or watching a movie together. Scenes are so intent on mystery, twists, and ineffectual reveals that many of the friendships seem unlikely. Having Charlie and Alex bond in a scene that worked to serve no other purpose was so unique that I made a note of it. That's how rare it is to see these teenagers behave like teenagers. Anyway, say goodbye to that. They kiss after the school shooting drill, after Charlie coaches Alex through a breakdown. At this point, Charlie is just on him, and it's so miserably uncomfortable. He grabs Alex and kisses him publicly. Alex is not out publicly, and this really upsets him. When Alex goes to be alone, Charlie asks his mother where he is so that he can go to find him to tell him he's breaking his heart by avoiding him.
I told her it was about homework, not the fact that you like boys, at least sometimes, and you're also breaking my heart.
Charlie performs 2 extremely public prom invitations for Alex, the first of which he ignores and the second one he actively runs away from. After the third invitation, Alex says, "If I say yes, will you stop?" Charlie brings cookies baked with THC to the camping trip and just calls them camping granola cookies, handing them out willy-nilly. Everyone, including Clay, eats some without knowing they have weed in them. This could be the cause for some of the weirdness on that trip, but it also ends up triggering a positive on a drug test Clay is made to take later, causing an argument with his parents and brother. This, as with a lot of things, has no consequence and never comes up again, even though the boys are told that they are both grounded until they can come up with a reason as to why Clay's test was positive. You can't just feed people drug cookies, that's weird. When Clay says he's attending prom with Charlie and Alex, he tells Justin Alex is scared that Charlie will make a move, and Justin responds, he is known for his hands. Like, if this was said about a straight couple, this would be a major red flag.
One dance. What language do you need knowing?
The problem here is that the show is so insistent on pushing the black cat golden retriever relationship that Alex admits, after being crowned prom king and queen in a dance that spans the entire length of a song that I ended up skipping through, that he is so in love with Charlie. I watched this guy get followed and harassed and embarrassed by a man who literally refuses to hear the word no, and the show makes them prom king and king, soulmate lovers, in one big crescendo. Alex can like who he wants, but damn, this was gross.
And another part of me is happier than I've ever been before. I think I'm in love with you.
I much preferred Alex and Winston. Winston is quiet, stable, and patient. He put it on the table and then let Alex come to him. The two embark on a relationship that feels very mutual and respectful. Alex and Winston meet and begin a relationship at the peak of Alex's self-imposed guilt. One near-drowning incident leaves Alex with a woeful bit of empathy for the dead Bryce, but thankfully his father is on hand to immediately wipe clean any feelings of guilt by reminding him that his friends all put themselves on the line for him and he needs to pay them back by staying very quiet and not implicating them in any crimes that they have all committed.
Dad, it's not right.
Your friends put it all on the line for you.
Season 3 might have been wank, but it wrapped up pretty well, and the only remaining plot thread is just Monty was framed for a murder he didn't commit. Will he see justice? The short answer is no, and the long answer is fuck no. Although Alex expresses a clear wish to confess, to get it off his conscience, even if it means he goes to jail, he is talked out of it at every turn. The resounding opinion of the cast is, well, Monty and Bryce are dead now, so framing Monty is a victimless crime, and you may as well take the win while you can have it. I thought about this, and I was like, I don't know if I'd do something different. If Monty was alive, yeah, it would be a violation of justice, and he would deserve exoneration after a fair trial, but he's dead. If someone I loved shoved a rapist off a pier and then framed a dead rapist, I think I'd find it within myself to decide I had bigger battles to fight. I think the problem is my choice would still be evil. I think it would be a bad thing overall. It's human, and I think many people would do the same, but it's fundamentally not a good thing to do. The problem is that there's not really much entertainment drama in showing it. We're watching a young man do something that leaves a bad taste in our mouth, and nothing really happens. The story fizzles to a halt. It's not made me like or dislike him anymore. I don't feel any kind of indignation about it. I just think it's a crap premise for a final season of TV, and I can see why the show got cancelled if this is all it has to work with anymore. So Clay tells Alex that Winston shagged Monty, and that's why Winston has taken an interest in them. Alex dumps him, and Winston's like, I wasn't gonna do anything, but now I totally am.
Monty wasn't gay.
People surprise you.
What the fuck does this mean? He befriends Diego, Justin and Clay's biggest hater, now dating the actually guilty Jess, and he befriends Monty's younger sister Estella, who misses her brother but doesn't seem all that proud of him, nor all that interested in learning about what actually happened. Winston encourages Diego to be more skeptical of what Jess is telling him, which sort of works but never truly turns Diego against her. He gets a copy of Bryce's tape and listens to it with his new team, which ends up not being all that relevant. Estella brings him Monty's notes and they figure out that 21 was Justin's codename in coded messages between Monty and Bryce, which goes nowhere, and when Zach confesses to him that he beat Bryce the night of his death, both of them thinking they're in a real school shooting situation and getting stuff off their chests, Winston ignores his plea for confidentiality and immediately rats him out to all of Monty's friends.
What the fuck were you thinking?
I thought that I was gonna die.
We're all gonna fucking die.
Diego uses this to encourage Zach to come clean. Zach doesn't come clean, and that's really where that ends.
Some of us are accessories after the fact to murder.
I planted evidence. I'm an accessory. I mean, we all are.
Not me.
Nothing happens to any of them, and it all just gets swallowed by the end. And since it's apparently so easy to grab all this evidence and follow all these leads, the show ends up being very vague about what exactly it drops and how. No one can be found out, naturally, so all this investigative work Winston does, all these ironclad leads he finds, all these notes and testimonies, ends up having to amount to nothing, because following any of them through to their logical conclusion would end this season 5 episodes early, and we can't have that. Alex eventually pulls Winston aside and goes, "It was me, I shoved Bryce off the pier when he attacked me," and walks off. In the next scene, Winston is wearing a cardigan instead of his scary black coat, implying his tenure as school PI is over. At the end of the show, Winston basically stops him, goes, "Did you ever love me?" They hug, and he walks off forever. Winston's arc is pretty organic because he is forced to come to terms with the way he romanticizes people. He is in love with everyone he has any kind of intimacy with. He knows Monty for a short period of time and takes more of him than Monty's own sister does. At prom, he reunites with Monty's ghost, who tells him to pack it in while they dance. Stop playing up their memories. You don't know me, and you never did, and I wouldn't have been all that nice to you.
The good side of things.
The Monty-Bryce storyline also wraps up with Jess, also through the use of lazy ghosts. Watching Jess make peace with her past might require more specificity and nuance than a monologue full of empty words, so in the final few moments of the show, she meets Bryce's ghost and speaks to him while the others burn Hannah's tapes.
We had to love each other at the end of it all. You did that.
So that's something, right?
Sure.
At this point, Bryce walks off, and you can see the way Justin Prentice is trying to keep his hands in his pockets and a steady gait as he walks down a hill just a little bit too steep, and his legs want to do that weird skip thing you do when you're trying to keep your balance. Bryce walks all the way down the hill as Jess returns to her friends, telling us that Jess also sees ghosts, sees visions, speaks to hallucinations. Yes, no, they represent trauma, maybe, or maybe writing character resolutions is really hard, and the writers have gotten so used to having Clay's every decision piped into him by a 24/7 staffing of force ghosts that they decided, fuck it, we'll just have Jess hallucinate now too. Monty and Bryce also wrap up with Clay, who, as always, considers himself to be an integral mechanism to everything that occurs at that school. In doing so, Clay meets with Monty's ghost, who explains that he savagely, sexually assaulted and brutalized Tyler because...
I get angry. I did things out of rage and fear that weren't really what was in my heart.
In episode 1, we see Diaz tell Deputy Standall that he might reopen the Bryce Walker case due to some blips in the evidence. Annie's damning statement, for example, was never recorded in audio or video, only writing. This thread flimsily drapes along the length of the season, but is dropped in episode 10 when Diaz, speaking to Deputy Standall, hints that he understands that Standall covered up Alex murdering Bryce and decides that he won't rip that up again. Thus, the entire storyline began and concluded completely independently of the entire main cast, and was wrapped up with zero involvement from any party outside of these 2 police officers. Fantastic. The sun sets on our cast after the final episode, Graduation, which is a whopping 1 hour and 40-minute bonanza. It's absurd. I don't know why TV shows have the episode length and budget of a small movie every time, but it's wild to me that this episode is so long. Justin passes away surrounded by his friends and family. The funeral happens, Alex chokes on the stand, Zach does a nice speech, Clay rests his head on Jess's shoulder as the two bond over their mutual loss. Then there's this big graduation ceremony where old faces resurface and everyone gets to say a few words. Miss Baker sends Clay all of Hannah's tapes and they bury them together as a team, looking out over an evergreen county that once felt so big but now seems so small. Alex is accepted into UC Berkeley, Jess goes to Berkeley, Clay goes to Brown, Annie to Stanford. We have no idea why. None of them are wearing honours sashes during their graduation, so it's clear they didn't make it on good grades. Everyone gets to do their final monologues, much emptier than the last. The main cast lie across the bleachers and each voice their individual wishes for the future. Everyone gets into college, even Zach, who purposefully flunked every assignment to intentionally fail the year. The fact that his mother has installed CCTV in his bedroom is a detail he raised and was never ever addressed. Across the course of the season, Clay does 1,000 things that would have him shot dead by the police if he was black, hands down. My personal favourite was when he barged into the police station and began screaming that he had a gun, and the officers just gently talked him down and then cuddled him. In the final scene, Clay and Tony get into Tony's car and he begins the long drive to Nevada, where he has accepted his scholarship. I don't know why they sit in silence here. It's really weird. Some people have suggested that the writers took inspiration from the movie The Graduate, where a bride runs away with a man, and once they're sitting on the bus together and the excitement of the moment trickles away, you see them silently come to terms with the gravity of what they've done, and second, third, and fourth thoughts cross their expressions. No, I do not know what the relevance of that would be, but weirdly, I kind of believe this theory. I just think the writers thought it would be a cool reference and inserted it without any thought. You could also interpret that now the chaos of high school is over, the two of them can stop and breathe for a moment together, finally free of the drama and struggle that characterized their lives previously. Still, I feel like the tone of the scene is too awkward to feel relief. You could interpret that these two have nothing in common without drama between them, and neither can think of anything to say to each other under normal circumstances. We've never seen the two share any hobbies or talk about anything that wasn't some bizarre pressing life or death issue. Maybe they genuinely have nothing to talk about anymore. Or maybe they just left the cameras rolling to see what the actors would do, and the actors just didn't do anything. Whatever the reason, it's the oddest final scene to any TV show I've watched in a long time. That's 4 seasons of 13 Reasons Why. Thanks for watching. Overall, this show was pretty bad. The first season was great, the second season was fine, the third season was shit, and the fourth season was just a walking corpse. If you enjoyed it, stick around for other videos. I cover other stuff. Maybe I'll do a final summary video on my thoughts overall, like a little podcast style thing, but I'll see how I feel. Regardless, thank you for watching. See you around.